Hello, and welcome to Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. My name is Ben Hauk, and I'm pleased to be able to introduce the 7th episode in our ongoing series. For our March podcast of 2023, IGS President Lance Strate and Treasurer Thom Gencarelli interview the media literacy maven and communication scholar Renee Hobbs. Professor Hobbs was our Alfred Korzybski Memorial Lecturer in 2006, and the discussion covers general semantics and language arts, propaganda, online communication and technology, and of course, media education and schooling. Let's listen in.
Welcome to Semantic Reactions, or welcome back, hopefully, but this is the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. My name is Lance Strate. I'm here with Thom Gencarelli, and we're here with our special guest, Renee Hobbs. Now, Renee is an American scholar and educator who works in the field of media literacy education, and she's professor of communication studies at the Harrington School of Communication and Media, and she's the founder of the Media Education Lab at the University of Rhode Island. Renee is also the author or editor of 12 books on media literacy, and that includes Exploring the Roots of Digital and Media Literacy Through Personal Narrative, and Create to Learn, an Introduction to Digital Literacy. The 2-volume title, The International Encyclopedia of Media Literacy, The Library Scene, Film and Media Literacy in Schools, Colleges, and Communities, Mind Over Media, Propaganda Education for a Digital Age, and just in 2021, Media Literacy in Action, Questioning the Media. And if we can refer to Renee Hobbs as a medium in her own right, we're here to question her. And so welcome, Renee. It's great to have you with us and great to see you again.
Happy to be here.
And you, among your many other credits, too many to really list unless we want to take up all the time in this podcast, but certainly one that of particular significance for us is that you gave the Alfred Korzybski Memorial Lecture back in 2006. So let me start out by asking you, what are your views and your thoughts about general semantics these days?
Yes, of course. Well, I have such fond memories of my time at the Institute back in Fort Worth, I think it was at one time. Yeah. And of course, of that, a great honor of being invited to be the Korzybski lecturer. I feel like general semantics is really having a little bit of a moment right now, as folks who are coming from a wide range of disciplines in computer science and engineering and sociology and education are sort of trying to explain the epistemological crisis of the present moment, you know, where we don't know what to believe. We don't know what's true. Anybody can say anything. Demagogues can weaponize information, and everybody's presenting a view of reality that is always, the map and not the territory, as you say.
Yeah.
And it's heartening to see younger scholars, like, for instance, Phil Nichols at Baylor University, writing in a recent issue of Curriculum Inquiry, where he reflects on media education and the limits of literacy, and he harks back to the general semantics movement of the 1930s and suggests that the philosophical and design-centered focus of that community is kind of like what we need now. So isn't that cool? Right? The younger scholars rediscovering this work and seeing its relevance to, the complex world we live in 2023.
That's very cool.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't come across that article. I didn't know about it. He says it's what we need now because, could you speak to that?
He's worried that media literacy is not sufficiently centered on preparing people for citizenship. And he has a number of ideas about how important it is for people to understand the way the digital platforms that we use constrain our discourse. And so to explore that, he naturally draws on medium theory, right? And then he goes back even further, right? He goes back to the origins of general semantics as it was a way to kind of deal with another kind of epistemological crisis, right? So the problem he's trying to solve is his concern that the attention to the way that algorithms and recommendation engines and platforms that we use are kind of invisibly shaping public discourse in ways we don't fully understand.
Well, this kind of relates to the topic of one of your recent books, and going back to really the 1920s, and really, I guess when you refer to an epistemological crisis, I mean, maybe it was right after World War I. And of course, this is what started Korzybski down his path. And at the same time, sort of running parallel to the formation of general semantics, was the sudden interest in propaganda and the founding of the Institute for Propaganda Analysis and that concern. So I was wondering if you could speak to that topic of propaganda.
Yeah, of course.
How it relates to all this.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I do feel that, again, nice to see a generation of younger scholars looking at the history of media literacy education through focusing on what happened, what was going on with these interdisciplinary scholars. Because if you think about it, back in the 1920s, it was really the formation of the professional associations we now know and love, right? It used to be that the English teachers and the speech togethers were together, but then they quickly hated each other and off to separate, right? And the academic disciplines really became established during that period of time, creating a focus on specialized knowledge, where at the time, the topic of propaganda required a kind of interdisciplinary approach. And this, I think, was part of the appeal of general semantics, is the way it was explicitly, intentionally, not completely academic, and also interdisciplinary. And it was concerned with this relationship with the practice of analysis and the general public, and it appealed. It spoke to the general public. And so when I wrote the Mind Over Media book, Mind Over Media, Propaganda, Education, and Digital Age, I devote a chapter to the history of propaganda education to try to unpack how ideas in general semantics got used by the propaganda, Clyde Miller and his colleagues at Columbia University, and how those ideas became embedded into English language arts education, and how, because they were so perfectly written for the medium of the time, radio right. was the dominant medium of the time. They appealed to English teachers who continued to use those rhetorical appeals. The classical Greeks dressed up in some clever language like glittering generalities, bandwagon, and so forth.
Remember all those.
Until they long outlived their usefulness, right? So teachers still teach those today, but in a way, the gap between what we need to know now and what was useful in the 1930s has become more and more striking. And so trying to understand the way in which media literacy moving forward needs to figure out how to teach about algorithms, how to teach about recommendation engines, how to teach about filter bubbles, and the way we get trapped in our own biased understanding of the world.
And there's a great point about English and the kind of split, but it was also that many of the people in the field of communication and in the study of media came out of English literature as their area, and that, of course, includes Marshall McLuhan and Neil Postman, and that how in schools, or in secondary schools and I guess primary schools, they started to refer to language arts, which is always sort of an interesting phrase, I think, but so that kind of feeds into media literacy, or media literacy becomes an extension of language arts. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. At the Northeast Media Literacy Conference, which was held online in January, a scholar from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, his name is David Fleming. He gave one of the keynote addresses. And he wrote a really interesting article a couple of years back called Fear of Persuasion, where he traces how people in writing and composition, people in English education, came to fear the study of persuasion and replace it with the study of argumentation, taking the classic ethos, logos, and pathos, and creating a hierarchy that placed logos at the top. Well, the Greeks never did that, right? They understood all three of those to be very important, working together to affect and social influence. And he very nicely historically tracks how, starting in about 1980, English teachers stepped away from persuasion altogether. They also stepped away from listening and speaking, by the way, which in the 1940s was very healthily brought in, thanks to Marshall McLuhan and others, right? But then it kind of has evaporated, has weakened, has become a shadow of its former self. And just a few days ago, we had a speaker, Brian Gregory, a brand new PhD. Now he's at St. Francis. He was at Teachers College. He's a New Yorker. He wrote his dissertation on the critical listening movement. And he traced it back. Guess what? He traced it back to general semantics too.
Wow.
And the rise of interest in educational radio, right? And so he does a very nice job at pulling together the way in which people were talking to each other across the disciplines and fields back then. And he wants to restore the position of critical listening back in the curriculum, not just at the high school level or the elementary school level, but he also thinks we need to do it at the college level. He says, because of the way digital media are now, everybody's talking. Everybody can post a tweet, share a meme, blah, blah, blah. But all this talking and no listening, dangerous.
Talking about bringing critical listening into the schools and into higher education, my experience in following your work and following the movement and the importance of what's going on all these years, I teach in a media program where people in higher ed come to such a program because they plan to work in the industry. And I know, and we've talked about this before, how do you see establishing a program in media literacy big enough that it gets beyond the folks who see this as a special interest, and it gets into this sort of transdisciplinary realm, but earlier on, in primary education, in secondary education, among a citizenry, for parents, so that they can bring it to their kids. It seems to me that's always been the big battle with which you've been faced in your work, right?
It is one of the interesting challenges, and actually all over the world, in every country, is this tension of that kind of, sometimes in a shorthand way, I could say, belongs to answering the question, who owns media literacy? Now, we communication professors, we have long felt a sense of ownership. After all, here we are. We teach critically analyzing media, right? We use theoretical paradigms that are informed by different flavors of critical analysis, feminist analysis, Marxist analysis, hermeneutic analysis, you name it, right? We got lots of faculty teaching analysis and production. So a lot of countries around the world, the communication and media faculty feel like they own media literacy. And at the same time, the folks in education and in culture they actually feel they own the topic as well. And they feel there's a little tension. I remember being at a meeting at the National Communication Association where someone in that community said something like, damn those education professors who think they know how to teach this shit. Right. And it was very much a kind of, why are they including all those courses in the education department? And, that kind of disciplinary silos have always been part of the hyper specialization problems we have at university level. And I do think that media professionals and the training of media professionals can go a long way toward building a media literacy movement. Because if media professionals are media literate, then we might expect greater quality. We might expect greater sensitivity to the needs of the audience. We might expect more support and advocacy from them, right? But you're right. The real work is can't be limited to just the professional schools, right? It has to be that a student who majors in biology gets media literacy. It has to be that a student, and there's been a lot of momentum in the general education curriculum now. The last 10 years, there's hundreds now of gen ed courses in media literacy, mostly at small and medium-sized colleges, mostly taught, unfortunately, by adjunct faculty, sadly, but that's part of the economy of the higher education system right now, but it's happening, right? So media literacy as part of general education there's been a lot of progress on that front. And there's a lot of reasons why sometimes mass communication faculty find themselves like duking it out. The journalism professors want to teach it. The new media professors want to teach it. The feminist scholars want to teach it, right? And so sometimes like we get in our own way, don't we? Right? Yeah. About who owns it. And so I do feel like media literacy does require a lot of hand-holding across the disciplinary silos. So it thrives in places where there's a spirit of collaboration.
As the old joke used to be, that universities suffer from a hardening of the categories. But even within that sphere, isn't it true that there's some tension between the folks, say, who want to teach production skills as literacy, as opposed to the folks who just want to be critical and don't see any use, in fact, for, if you're teaching production skills, then you're part of the problem rather than part of the solution.
Yeah, so true. And that, of course, that split is the oldest and most longstanding dynamic in the field of communication and media, going right back to Iowa and the very first communication schools in the 20th century. So that longstanding split is still real, and media literacy pedagogies still navigate that split, right? Yeah, that is certainly the case. I think it's also the case that we're seeing some really interesting and I think potentially really productive conflict. Conflict is productive, right? We academics, we fight because, there's so much at stake. Right? We fight because that's the way we sort of come to understand new ideas. That's the way we create new ideas. So there's been really an interesting argument emerging between the folks who want to position media literacy as all about fact checking, all about information, all about journalism, and those of us, I'm one of them, who says, no, it's not all about information. You got to study persuasion. You have to study entertainment. You have to look at culture, right? So that tension has been really interesting because, truthfully, I think it's wrong to position consumers as having to be fact checkers. That's too big of a burden, right? I don't think that's realistic at all. And so teaching people to be fact checkers, sure. That's not what I do, right? And I don't think that's a productive line of inquiry. And neither do I appreciate scholarship that positions the deficit model. It's very easy, Lance, it's so easy to produce data that shows 90% of kids can't identify what sponsored content is. 90% of adults can't identify what sponsored content is. Producing that kind of data gets you a headline.
Right.
it gets you maybe Facebook as a funder, but it doesn't actually reflect the real complexity, which is people do know stuff. There's stuff people know, but they can't say they know it. There's stuff people know. There's different kinds of tacit and explicit and implicit knowledge that people have about media. And when you get in a classroom, often you can uncover some of that through dialogue and discussion.
And debate and disputation, which goes back to the agonistic, to use Walter Ong's favored term, the agonistic tone of academia, getting at truth by
argument.
By argument, meaning presenting opposing points of view, not meaning yelling at each other, although sometimes that does happen.
Yeah. I want to tell you about my new initiative, Courageous RI, because it's directly related to that point. And boy, are we having a fascinating experience with it. So I was really surprised when the Department of Homeland Security opened up a line of funding that had the phrase media literacy in it. I've got alerts on that phrase, right? So anybody who uses that phrase, I find out about it, right? So, wow, Department of Homeland Security. Well, it turns out that under the new leadership of Alejandro Mayorkas, they recognize that the problem of domestic extremists, white supremacy, and domestic terrorism is like the biggest threat we have to public safety today. We see it just yesterday. Wasn't there a mass shooting just yesterday? Right? Won't there be one 5 days from now? Because that's how often they are. And
like tomorrow or tomorrow.
Exactly.
I think the statistic is that there have been more mass shootings than days of the year so far.
Wow. Unbelievable. Yeah. So when they opened this line of funding, we were like, okay, we want to see if we can offer a program that reaches adults through dialogue and discussion on Zoom. Because in our little state of Rhode Island, tiny as it is, people will not cross a bridge from Woonsocket to Westerly, right? But a Zoom meeting, look how easy it is. We're sitting here in the comfort of our homes, and yet we're interacting with diverse others. So the idea was a dialogue and discussion experience for adults that explores conspiracy theories, disinformation, hoaxes, all the rest, and brings people together who normally don't hang out in a room together. Program 2, an education initiative focused on high school and college students. And program 3, a youth multimedia contest where kids talk about the importance of slowing down when they use media and thinking and asking critical questions. So we had our first 2 meetings. It's been fascinating. The right-wing trolls have kind of come after us a little bit because they're afraid that us woke liberal professors are indoctrinating through this education program. And we had to work real hard to say, no, we're creating a space of dialogue and discussion, right? This will only work if you show up, right? And they did show up, and it was fantastic. And people were a little bit uncomfortable, okay? Because sometimes we haven't heard these voices. They aren't our neighbors. They aren't people, our family and friends. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the session, people were like, whoa, it's so useful to hear how other people think through these issues and what they notice in media messages that I completely missed, right? So we all might see the same, in this case, 3-minute news story. But through dialogue and discussion, we discover that we interpreted this message in different ways based on our background, our lived experience, our knowledge, our ideologies. People were amazed. And that aha experience of discovering the limits of your own interpretations and the intellectual curiosity that results from that was a lot of fun, Lance.
Oh.
The discovery went both ways of the
research will tell. I would say the jury's out on that, Thom. I feel like I want to be able to look. We're documenting this really carefully with a lot of cool technology tools that will help us identify moments in the dialogue. The dialogues happen with groups of 6 or 8. So if we had 130 people in groups of 6 or 8, so I wasn't in all the groups, right? Gotcha. Probably were more combative. Some were probably more consensus-y. Some had moments we might think of as kind of aha moments. And what we're going to try to do is use that data to determine, like, what are the conditions under which that aha experience happens? Because truthfully, wouldn't you like to be able to know what that is and then be able to use that as a teacher in your own classroom? Yes, that's what I'm hoping for this project. That's one of the long-term goals I have for this project. Let's see if we can figure out how to use dialogue and discussion as a real pedagogy that creates opportunities for multi-perspectival thinking, for reflective thinking, for self-awareness, and for the kind of connection between theory and practice that we know happens in dialogue and discussion, but like how and why, that's what we want to figure out.
So did you show them all, or do they all see something first and talk about it?
In the last session we did a session a couple days ago on preventing violent extremism. Mm-hmm. We started with an Instagram. I want you to imagine this. It's an Instagram post. It's a cocktail napkin. And in black and white lettering, it says mass shooting, thoughts and prayers, media extravaganza, gun debates. Nobody actually does anything. And then back to mass shooting. And it presents a very despairing look that reflects the kind of hopelessness and helplessness that we feel about this now very familiar form, this ritualistic performance that happens for an intense 3 days and then goes away and then comes back 5 days later. The quality of the discussion about this cocktail napkin was deep. And people analyzed, for example, one phrase that's in the cocktail napkin is the new normal. And the word normal is in quotation marks. And one lady said, I think the person who made this cocktail napkin put the word normal in quotation marks because it should not be normal. This should not be something that we ever accept as normal. And you could just feel the reverberations because some people maybe never even noticed those quotation marks. Mm-hmm. And another person commented on the word extravaganza and said, media extravaganza. That makes me think, they're probably profiting from this because, for the intense 3 days of the coverage, like people are tuned in, right? And that this is an extravaganza because it's part of the business model. It was really powerful, Lance, how something very simple, something that people might have just flicked through on their Instagram in 2 seconds. What happened when they actually took the time to slow down and think about it and share their interpretations? It's an example of system 2 thinking at its very best, right? And this is why media literacy, I think, it's not the only thing that's going to get us out of this mess, but it's a piece of it, It's a piece of it.
Could you explain what you mean by system 2 thinking?
Oh, sure. So this guy, Daniel Kahneman, and his colleague, Amos Tversky, they are cognitive scientists, and they wrote a really influential series of papers about how much we humans rely on cognitive shortcuts, that to survive in the world and to get along, we can't always think logically and linearly and systematically and carefully and slowly. The world demands that we think fast. And so system 1 is fast thinking. It's automatic, it's quick, it's reactive, it's good for survival, right? Saber-toothed tiger's coming right at you, right? You
better run.
Think fast. Kahneman and Tversky, through a series of really interesting experiments, showed the biases of system 1 thinking and the biases of system 2 thinking, that slow, logical, linear, reflective thinking. And so it's really interesting to think about how a lot of our media consumption is system 1. We're just reacting to it. That Instagram post makes me angry. And I write an angry rant. Right. That one makes me feel happy. So I put a heart emoji. So much of our media consumption rewards us for being in system 1, quick, fast, reactive. And media literacy wants to make you spend more cognitive effort.
Right. General semantics, though, I mean, this corresponds to system one is signal reactions, knee-jerk, immediate reactions, reacting with behavior, and symbol reactions would be system two, which is instead of reflex, they're reflective, delayed reactions where you think about what it means and how you should respond to the stimuli.
How totally cool. It makes me wonder if we went back in Kahneman and Tversky back to their very first papers on this, where they first introduced the term, if they were aware of the history of that use of that term, because, you know, in a way, it was kind of an early cognitive science, wasn't it, that the general semanticists were doing? I mean, before there was even a term called cognitive science, that's what it was.
Long before that. And they were grouped together. I mean, Korzybski used the term semantic reaction, which by some strange coincidence is the name of our podcast series, Semantic Reactions. But that is, you know, how we respond to whatever the stimuli is, whether it's a message or something in our environment. But, you know, and of course, general semantics advocates for symbol reactions over signal reactions, not as an absolute, because there are times when a reflex or, you know, quick reaction is called for, but, you know, that not many of the times we respond with signal reactions when we should be thoughtful and employ symbol reactions. But I mean, this traces back to Pavlov, of course, and the, you know, conditioned response.
Yeah. The trick is to figure out what's the reward system. What's the reward system that rewards you for slowing down and taking time?
Yeah.
Because actually it's more effort. It's more effortful on your part. It takes more time and it's harder.
Yes.
So why would anybody ever do system two thinking? And I feel like what I'm learning in the Courageous RI project is, can we make this fun? So that the fun becomes the reward system.
Yeah, also, just, sorry, you know, just on that, I mean, I think that a lot of the times it comes up because the signal reaction creates problems for people. And so there's no immediate reward, but rather there is the disincentive, the punishment.
The avoidance of pain.
Yeah. And, you know, where people are saying, you know, well, you know, I've got a problem here. And that's where you step in after the fact and say, well, the problem is the signal reaction when you should be employing a symbol reaction. But I think your point is really well taken, that, you know, what we really need is to reward the symbol reaction before there's a problem, you know, to encourage it rather than after the fact.
I think it also we need to step away in order to get to the symbol reactions that, you know, like when my students talk about the fact that on the weekend they get that notification from their iPhone, how many hours a day they were spending there, and they're on their phone for 6 or 7 hours a day. Well, while they're doing whatever it is they're doing for those 6 or 7 hours, which is what, like a third of the day, and they're going to sleep for hopefully a third of the day, they don't have time to do anything else other than to respond to what is there. They don't have time to step back and think. Right.
We think that the pandemic created a part of the motivation for this project, Courageous RI, is that we think the pandemic created a lot of social isolation, and that media devices came in to fill that void, that feeling of belonging that we all need. And the dialogue and discussion series, this is every 2 weeks, come at noon from 12 to 1, or come in the evening from 7 to 8 on Tuesdays, every 2 weeks now through July. And we think that the idea that a community of people come together for this small group conversations about media may have its own like social reward system built in, because it feels good when you say something and somebody else says, I agree with you, or that's a good point. Or even when they say, I disagree with you, there's still the sense that you're being heard, right? So we want to try to use belonging Because of the grant, we can also offer, by the way, financial rewards for attending, which really does set us up for success. So just full transparency, we're motivating people to show up because we think if you come regularly, you're going to have more effect. So from a research point of view, we're going to show bigger changes because you show up to 11 of these, you're going to get media literate, right? But the idea of creating a feeling of belonging and community is super important. And I think we've all discovered in our teaching that this generation of kids needs more support in feeling connected to each other because of the damage that was done during the pandemic and in the isolation that they experienced, the social isolation that they encountered at a formative time in their development.
Mm-hmm. But when you say you'll get more media literate, how will you determine that whether they have or not?
Well, we've got some probably inadequate pre-post measures, but then we also have this wonderful way that we are capturing the qualitative data. We're working with this partner. MIT has a unit of MIT called the Center for Constructive Communication, and they created this very cool tool called the LVN platform. You upload your Zoom meeting to this platform, and they use a combination of artificial intelligence, and they display the data with the significant moments like highlighted through AI. Then you go in as the researcher and you read, well, yes, that was a significant moment, but also this one, this sentence is also a significant moment, and this one, and this one. And then the system recognizes what you identified as a significant moment, and then the next data set you upload, it uses what you identified to learn what a significant moment is. So, and if you think about this, we had 8 people in a room times 100. We had a lot of rooms already just in the 2. So we're going to have hundreds of these small group conversations and using this tool to identify some patterns. And you know me, I'm really not a qualitative researcher, right? But I feel like with this, I might have something to learn.
So we could actually do that with, for our listeners.
With the podcast.
Yeah, for our listeners, we're recording this via Zoom.
You could.
So we could actually upload it and see what the AI thinks, but maybe we'll just...
For the significant moments in the conversation. That'd be cool.
But maybe we'll just leave that to our listeners to determine.
To go back a little bit to propaganda and the moment, and not the moment so much of the pandemic and trying to get out of it, but the moment of our politics. General Semantics clearly has as one of its core concepts the idea of a two-valued orientation of either or thinking. And the polarization that's going on that you spoke to before, the bubbles that we are in as a result, not just of our social media use, but certainly it's been brought into sharp relief by our social media. What are we doing in terms of media literacy to, I don't want to use the word combat that, but that's the first word that came to mind, to try to get us past this idea that we're taking sides. And of course, a political system that's a two-party system feeds into it and shapes it and creates it also. But how are you trying to help us get away from or past or beyond that?
What a great question. Thank you for asking. One of the reasons why the opportunity to really directly address this problem of violent extremism through media literacy is so interesting is that you remember the old song from the musical South Pacific? You've got to be taught to love and hate. You've got to be carefully taught, right? This idea that we learn who to hate. Right? And the construction of an enemy, the creation of an in-group and an out-group is a signature feature of propaganda, past, present, and future, right? In Nazi Germany, the sense of national unity was very inspiring. German people finally had a sense of belonging and inclusivity. They were part of a big national project they could all be proud of, right? Except If you were Jewish and then you became the other, the out-group, and then stigmatizing the other started gradually and then led to genocide, right? So that kind of construction of in-group and out-group and how it starts, what it feels like when you're part of it, what feels like when you're in the in-group and you feel the feeling of pride and belonging, and you feel the sense of disrespect and hatred, what it feels like when you're in the out group and you're being stigmatized for an aspect of your identity. Like that's all playing out right now between Republicans and Democrats in ways that are super, super destructive. Left unchecked, I believe that in-group, out-group construction will lead to civil war. And history proves us on that. Like that's nothing controversial about that point at all. So the issue is, what do you do to disrupt that? Well, in the 1940s, we had Gordon Allport, who had a great idea about it. And it's the premise, the theoretical premise on which Courageous is founded, social contact theory. When you put a Nazi and a liberal in the same room, all of a sudden, these are more complicated human beings. All of a sudden, these people do not fit neatly into stereotypes. In fact, we have really good literature on this from public opinion. It shows that most of us hold false stereotypes about the people of the other political party. If you're a Democrat, it's likely that you think Republicans are all rich. They are not. If you're a Republican, you think Democrats are all pro-choice. They're not, right? So this idea that when you get actual contact with a member of the other group, you can't easily stereotype them. The stereotype gets disrupted and the cycle of hate gets disrupted. So I don't know. That may sound Pollyanna-ish to some of your listeners, right? That we could disrupt the cycle of hate by actually talking across our difference. But a lot of people are doing it, not just me. There's the group in New York you should look at, Braver Angels. Braver Angels has facilitated discussions that bring together people from red and blue sides of the spectrum for civil conversation. And that turns out to be surprisingly generative to inspire people to actually just want to know more about the beliefs of the other group and to not be so knee-jerk and hateful in responding. And I will admit, like, look at my Twitter thread, Lance. Sometimes I've been mean and spiteful. Like,
I know.
I have.
Fortunately, not towards me, I'll add, but and for which I'm grateful.
But I do feel like I am discovering my own culpability in perpetuating cycles of blame and shame.
Mm-hmm.
So until I recognize that I'm part of the problem, we won't be able to solve the problem. So I'm working on my own communication behavior so that I can honor the complexity of people's lived experience, even when I disrespect their beliefs, even when I hate their beliefs.
Right.
They're still people, right?
Yeah. And this has a general semantics component as well, because
Really?
Well, consciousness of abstracting, because stereotyping is a form of abstracting. And what you're talking about is bringing us back down from higher levels of abstracting, where I'm looking at you not as a person, but as a category. So to bring it down to the concrete level of an individual. And I think these two things fit together very well, because if you understand how abstracting works, and that really did inform it, the connection's lost over time, but when education about prejudice and stereotyping was introduced in the schools, a lot of it was derived from general semantics and understanding how abstracting works, but then they forgot where it came from, and it just became kind of basic general knowledge. And I think the missing component from the way general semantics approaches it is that we're just looking at this consciousness of abstracting in general and from the point of view of the individual. but here the idea of relationships and community and engaging with one another provides the opportunity for engaging in lowering of high level abstracting. Then what's missing is to explain that process of why we were up there in the first place. Why did we, and really, one of the objections when you're stereotyped is to say, I'm not a category, I'm an individual. Treat me like an individual. And of course, the other objection is that the generalizations you're making about our group is selective, right? Every group has bad people in it. So if you just focus on that, every group has criminals in it, people who are convicted of a crime. Every group has rich people. Every group has people who are lazy or stingy or stupid or successful. So to single out one particular trait and then ignore the ones that don't conform to the stereotype. Or finally, to see that there is a basis for a particular stereotype, but it's not inherent in the group, it's contextual, right? That our ethnic group is all in this particular vocation, not allness is wrong, but many of us go into this particular sector because we're shut out of other sectors and because some people made it in this sector and they help others, and that is part of a socioeconomic context that is particular to a time and place. So, to get at all of these ideas and then connect it to, hey, you're just another person like me. I think that's beautiful.
I'm thinking about that example makes me think about how demagogues weaponize identity, right? And use it to divide people because it's actually, it helps if for profit and power, it can be very useful. Demagogues have done it throughout all of human history and we're susceptible to it, right? But I also think about that moment. There's a moment in history that I kind of am longing to see come back. And we're all too young to really remember it, but you know the story. It's when during the McCarthy era, as McCarthy's lies became more and more, just bigger and bigger and more outrageous and more unsubstantiated with evidence, that the senator from Wisconsin or wherever he was from said, at long last, sir, do you have no sense of human decency? So at some point, we get disillusioned with demagogues when we discover that it's in their interest to put us in an identity box and pit us against another group, right? It's in their, they win from that, not us. And I feel like that sense of disillusionment is coming, right? It's not here yet. I'm waiting. I'm waiting.
Hope and prayer.
I'm hoping and praying. But I do feel like that process, I have hope in humanity. We get tricked by demagogues. We get tricked by propaganda. We get tricked by conspiracy theories. We go down rabbit holes. We're fallible. But there are these inflection points when a certain set of circumstances are right and the scales fall off and we see the world closer to the way we need to see it. And I think in way, all your readers, all your listeners, we're all in very small and different ways trying to contribute to that next phase of our future, the future that hasn't arrived yet, but it's coming.
Well, we have to make it happen or it won't. I'm thinking, I had a colleague at Fordham University named George Gordon, and he was a major figure in propaganda, major scholar of propaganda, mass persuasion, and during the 60s, 70s, he also started communication departments in various places. And he was retiring, And back in the day, Neil Postman used to have in-house conferences, media ecology conferences, or kind of mostly retreats for graduate students. And Neil Postman's colleague, Terry Moran, who was a scholar of propaganda, well, George Gordon was his professor. And when he was retiring, I suggested bringing him for one of the, to be a speaker at one of these conferences, and they agreed. And so he came, and this was right after the fall of the Soviet Union and breakup of it, and following the breakup of the communist bloc, the fall of the Iron Curtain and all of that. And he gave a talk, and he basically said that, he had spent his professional career studying propaganda, and what all of this, this is the 90s, right? All of this had revealed was that he had completely wasted his time, because all of this proved that propaganda, which they thought was so all-powerful, was in fact ineffective. I'm wondering what you would say to that.
That said, the sense of despair at the end of his career, to feel that way, I just feel so sad about that, right? So my heart goes out to somebody who finds themselves at the end of their career feeling that sense of despair. That's a pity, because so we're all building on knowledge together in our work, right? We're in conversation. That's why we publish, right? That's why we do things like this, right? We're all in conversation with each other as we try to understand a complex phenomenon. And what that means is that along the way, we're going to constantly revise and change and alter ideas. Back in the 1930s, there was good reason why they thought the hypodermic needle theory of propaganda was the right way to think, right? At the time, that was a plausible understanding of how communication worked. We later came to understand, no, it's way more complicated than that. But I feel like there's a certain generosity of spirit that's needed. And as we think about our own imperfect contributions to the knowledge, and that the right stance, that somebody should have shook him by the shoulders and said, look, we're all travelers on a journey in time. If I could go back and tell my, graduate student self something that would have changed the trajectory of my whole career, that would be great. But we do the best we can with what we have at the moment in time we have it.
Yeah.
Right. So let's be generous of spirit, acknowledging that none of us has a handle on the truth. He shouldn't have felt disappointed. He should have felt proud that he had an opportunity to contribute to such an important field.
Renee, I just want to clarify that he was not despairing or any of that. It was really a fascinating talk and a brilliant talk in its own right. But
he was humble, right?
Yeah. Well, it was the assumptions that had been made about propaganda, communist propaganda in the Soviet bloc, turned out to be wrong, in that most of the people had not fallen for that level of propaganda and immediately shook it off once they were allowed to, once the coercion.
Well, and I would say that what happened is, as the folks in Eastern Bloc countries got access to information through things like VCRs and Voice of America and alternative forms of communication, so the communication environment changed.
Right.
So therefore, there was a change in public opinion and in understanding. So it's a moving target. And those of us who are studying communication, doesn't it feel, it's so humbling. It's like the minute we think we understand the media, it changes.
Oh, yeah. I always say, folks in other fields have it easy, because like history doesn't change. You add a little bit more each year, but it's basically the same stuff. The people in English literature, it's the same kind of thing. They're always trying to find some new way to write about the same old stuff. But we're on an 18-month cycle of change, in terms of those of us concerned with media and technology. So we're always having to renew and review what we're talking about. Absolutely.
Can we talk a little bit about the change that's afoot? When we've been talking about demagoguery and propaganda, we've really been talking about, the message, the content. What about the delivery mechanisms and how they have changed lately and how they've been used for nefarious purposes against us all?
Yeah.
You brought up at the very outset of this conversation, talking about algorithmics. And the idea that they are invisible. I made the argument at one point that when McLuhan says that, the medium is invisible in the face of its content, the algorithm is sort of another layer of invisibility. We can get at an understanding of the medium, but how do we expect people to understand what is at that layer below, and what impact does it have?
Yeah. And that's why it's exciting to see new scholars trying to unpack then what do people need to know about the platforms, right? And what do we need to know about the way in which those decisions get made? I feel like there's like a kind of interesting generation gap going on, right? At one of our Courageous sessions, we critically analyzed a TikTok video. And we had a number of older people in the audience who were like, this is the first TikTok video I've ever seen. And then we had a bunch of younger people who, because they had seen a lot of them, had things to say about them, about the form, about the formula, about the way language was used on screen, about the way the sound was used, that really informed their analysis. Their familiarity with the genre informed their analysis in a way that the older people really couldn't analyze it the same way, right? With the same level of attention to form. And so I do feel like this is another reason why intergenerational dialogue. I don't want to force watching TikTok on anybody, but at the same time, I feel like there is an opportunity there for people of different generations to come together and share their interpretations, because it's a new medium. It's a new format, and within TikTok, there's different subgenres and formats, right, that we need to understand in order to analyze.
And we're talking about this on the day that a representative of the company went before Congress to talk about the fact that, we're so worried about the ways in which information is being used against us through the vehicle that is a TikTok, video through the company's platform. But all of the other social media platforms and applications before it that, started here, we've been doing the same thing.
And how about the little juicy little detail that in China, TikTok is limited to 1 hour a day for people under 18. It shuts off. Whereas here, it's like a little suggestion. You've been using it for an hour now.
Right. I think I actually read today that they have created that limit, but kids, of course, being,
blow by it. Right.
They find a way around it. Yeah.
Yeah, so we race to catch up, and the next new thing is Chat GPT, and then 6 months from now, there'll be something else, and there'll be something else after that. And it's exciting, it's humbling, and it's a lot of fun, isn't it?
In a despairing and disappointing kind of way, yes, I'd say so. Well, you mentioned woke before. Are you woke?
I am really, really fascinated at how this, I'm waiting for, have you read a great piece on the history of this term? It's a term like fake news, that its meaning has almost completely transformed over a very short period of time. And this goes back again to General Semantics and, of course, George Orwell, right? And the power of language to reshape reality, and how words mean what we mean them to mean, right? And the meanings can be easily shifted. If you're an effective communicator, you can destabilize meaning by shifting it. And I think with the word woke, we understand how that, as I understand it, the original term used by African Americans to describe the consciousness raising that happened among white people after the George Floyd murder, as we finally started to pay attention to the structural racism that exists all around us and in every aspect of our institutional systems, law, medicine, you name it, everywhere, right? We woke up to the institutional racism around us. That was the first meaning. But now, what the hell? Now it's an epithet to be hurled at liberals. It's an excuse to be superficial and shallow, to put your identity, to put your racial, ethnic, or gender identity in front of all other human values.
Right.
And wow, is that what a whiplash in terms of the way that word has shifted its meaning. Now it's a word that's pretty useless because of the way that it's been weaponized.
And at the same time, on the other end of the political spectrum, they say taking the red pill as their way of saying woke, which comes from the film The Matrix, where you take the red pill and you become aware that you are in the matrix rather than in reality. I couldn't help but comment. I don't know if it got picked up on the recording, but your phone just went off, and and that is so much a part of this current media environment as well, that we are constantly interrupted and distracted.
Always on.
So how do you approach that from a media literacy point of view? Because so much of media literacy is concerned about how to critically approach the content, but looking to this sort of phenomenon of just continual distraction, what is the answer that media literacy provides?
Well, Tiffany Schlein, right?
Yes.
And her media Shabbats, right?
Right.
I do feel that the way it works for me is my weekends are pretty protected. I am a workaholic, I'll admit it. I derive so much joy from my work, and I use the weekends to connect with nature, to connect with my family and my loved ones, to be in the community and to encounter art, right? And to refresh my senses away from screen media, with the exception of movie viewing in the evening, which, let's be honest, that's one of the joys of life, is getting to watch as many movies as I want from 8 p.m. till midnight. So I do feel that we all have different ways of finding balance in our lives, and finding screen media balance, it's something people have to work out for themselves. And it might change at different stages of the lifespan. I'm an old lady now, so I have a different way of getting balance than I did when I was raising 2 children and, multitasking my brains out then.
Didn't you say we were all young before?
Yeah, that too. It's a state of mind, Thom. It's a state of mind.
That's what we want.
How do you find balance?
Well, I was going to say,
who says we find it?
When we start to talk about screens, one of the problems that I see is just the convergence of screens. For instance, the extent to which, as a role model to my kids, who are pretty much grown at this point too, I spent a lot of time reading from my laptop, and I'm on my laptop. And so, I get my son a laptop when, I don't know how old he was, but what's it for him? Well, it's a toy. It's a device to play video games on. And he's not looking at my screen and what I'm doing. And, when everything is convergent, everything that we're doing is a click away, and right, the smaller screen or the screen that we're on right now, that I think has some serious repercussions.
Yeah.
Again, right now, I don't have any, my browser isn't open. My phone is not on, it's on stun, but it's not going to ring. But everything is just a click away, or everything is right in front of our face, including, if the TV's not around at 8 o'clock and you want to watch a movie, you can watch a movie on this.
Yeah.
So,
and you can do what we're doing right now, is we're chit-chatting. We're having a conversation as if we were in the same room together. It feels just as comfortable. If there were a scotch and soda here, it might be a little bit better. But let me just say that we are having a social interaction through screens. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
It is cool. And what you're doing on Courageous RI with breaking everybody up into, these small groups, in effect, I guess these little focus groups, that's fabulous too. Because, if change is happening because of the small group nature of that, that's amazing.
Yeah, so how we use screens, it's sort of like the nature of the convergence means now maybe we be more intentional and strategic about how we find community through screens, right?
Right.
And that's I can't roll back time and make all this technology shifts. I'm not one to wish for the good old days, which I don't think ever really were there, right? But I can see being intentional and strategic about how I use my time with the different kinds of pleasures. The pleasures of chatting, socially chatting like this, the pleasures of reading, the pleasures of viewing.
Yeah.
So, and it's interesting how all that focus on disinformation and misinformation and propaganda, I value, I had a 10-year experience in exploring it, but I feel like one of the reasons why I'm so interested in dialogue and discussion is because I want to re-encounter and remember the pleasure of talking about a movie after we watch it together. Right? The pleasure of talking about a book after we read it together. These forms of pleasure at shared media experience media experience doesn't have to isolate us. It can bring us together, but we have to be really intentional about how we do that.
And I think that's such an important point, and it really connects back to semantic reactions, because being intentional, being purposeful, so we reflect and think about, as opposed to the signal reaction of just, and I am very guilty of this. That is, I'm just sitting around and let me check and let me check and let me go on Facebook. Let me get off Facebook. Let me play this game. And it is a knee jerk. It's a thoughtless kind of response, as opposed to saying, whether it is taking the Shabbat response, strategy of turning the damn thing off for a day, or just saying, I'm going to put this aside for now and focus on this, but thinking, okay, is this an appropriate use for Zoom? What we're doing now appropriate? Is another is teaching a class an appropriate use, or is it maybe not appropriate and we ought to be doing this in person? So it's at exactly your point, Renee. Intention, purposefulness, reflection, and thought is exactly what we're missing. I have a question for you, because we've talked about movies a few times here. It's just come up. And I mentioned specifically The Matrix before. So, and this might be an idea for another book for you, or an anthology. But if you were to recommend movies, you have sort of identified yourself as an avid movie watcher, but movies that are specifically educational regarding media literacy, that get you thinking about media literacy. What would you recommend to our listeners or to other folks as movies that they ought to have watched?
Wow, that is a really great question. And I feel like we should crowdsource that, because I bet with like a bunch of people together, we could come up with a top 10 list that would be awesome.
But what would be yours?
Right now, the one that comes to mind that I just find myself, I want to do this. There's a bunch of movies that I want to do the study guide for, right? Because it's like, oh my God, this would be so interesting to do the study guide for. And the one that I finished most recently, the series that I found absolutely fascinating and really wanted to do the study guide for, was what is the name of them? The Lincoln Project. Oh my God. So the Lincoln Project is like a five-hour limited series on Netflix, or one, I don't know which streaming, right? That's another problem. Which streaming is it on? I'm not sure. It tracks the group of Republicans who turned against Trump and developed the very successful political propaganda campaign designed to get under his skin, to needle him, to make him angry, and to make him, look ridiculous. And it shows a little bit about how money and power corrupt politics.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows a little bit about the creativity required for people in media and communication fields to be able to come up with basically art or stuff that resonates emotionally with an audience. So the craft and art of political communication is beautifully illustrated. The corruption of it and the corrosive role of money in politics is beautifully illustrated. And the way in which these are very human, very fallible, deeply flawed characters. There's no angels in this group, right? They're just people. I just love I love the series. I think it was totally worth a view by your listeners. Lincoln Project series, put that on your list. And what about you? What's a film that you think would be a good thing to write a study guide about that had a media literacy moments?
I mentioned The Matrix, but I mean, there's first of all, there's many movies on TV, like going back to Network and broadcast news, quiz show, The Truman Show. Recently, Don't Look Up, I think would be kind of fun.
Yeah, Don't Look Up was good.
What about you, Thom? Yeah.
No, the first group that you mentioned were, I had thought of them immediately when you asked the question, but they were all, it's not so much that they're dated, but they're about television. Maybe not The Truman Show quite so much. Maybe The Truman Show speaks to now a little bit more. But I taught a class on this back at my former institution at Montclair State. Every summer it was films about television. And, we started with Network and we did broadcast news and we did Being There and, The Truman Show, To Die For, Pleasantville, all of them. But again, they're all about television. I'm trying to think of things that speak to our contemporary moment more than, the old, traditional media.
I teach a course on science fiction, film, and TV, and there are quite a lot of films and TV programs that deal with the internet, computers, and so forth.
Station 11.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh, I mean, do not just like right now, just shut down your computer and go watch Station 11. Station 11 is sci-fi. When you said sci-fi, Lance, that jogged my memory. Station 11 is a apocalyptic future set in Michigan, basically, where the end has come and nobody is left, and there's just a few people. It's something bad really happened, and there's just a few people, and there's a group of people who have formed a theater troupe. They're trying to rebuild society after this terrible disaster, and they walk from place to place through this part of Michigan, doing restaging Shakespeare's plays. But because they have to scavenge from whatever is left in the old world, the old dead world, the costumes and the props are fantastic. And the drama is a deeply human reflection on how do we navigate the chaos and uncertainty of our lived experience. How do we hold on to the best of our past to remind us of what it means to be human? And how do people continue to remember the past as it gets further and further past? What does it mean to remember? What's our obligation to remember?
There's also the comic book in it.
Yeah, there's a great media. There's a lot of media. The new generation, there's one great scene where the young one is saying, well, what was the internet? And how did it work? And could you pull up a map and it could tell you where to go? And that doesn't exist now, this young person, but somebody told her about how it used to be. Oh, so great.
There was a little bit of that kind of dialogue in The Last of Us, as another HBO series.
I haven't seen The Last of Us.
Post-apocalyptic.
We have to, of course, subscribe to all of these streaming services, and research has shown recently that most people subscribe to 2 because that's all that they can afford. And the idea that we'll be cord cutters, cord nevers, or the up and coming generation will be, well, if they want to stream all of these services, they're going to spend more money than their parents did on cable. And
It's true.
I guess they're saving money by not buying books or newspapers or magazines.
Well,
Watching TikTok for news, it's definitely cheaper.
Of course, they're also going to have, their home ISP and their mobile ISP to pay for as a foundation before they pay for any other streaming service too. So they have that.
So we're back to the depths of despair, are we?
Well, we're back to the political, economic reality of media industries and the way they get their hooks in us.
Well, thank you again. And it's been great to have you here as our guest, Renee, and we look forward to further dialogue in the future. Thank you, Thom, as well, and really great discussion today, folks. Okay.
This was a blast. I really enjoyed talking with both of you. It was an honor and a privilege to be part of the community and to continue to learn with you, Lance. You are a treasure to the field. Thom, your leadership in ETC, so very much appreciated. And thank you for publishing my essay on Postman. So
lead article.
You rock, my friend. Thanks again. Hey, and audience, you want to learn more about Courageous UI, you're invited. www.courageousri.com. Come hang out with us on Tuesdays.
Okay. Well, thank you for the invite. And folks, and this is going to be going on until when?
July.
Okay, until July 2023. Because the weird thing about doing these things as well is that who knows, somebody might be listening right now in the year 2067. I guess things don't look so promising right now, but hopes and prayers, folks, hopes and prayers. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye, thanks.
You've been listening to our March 2023 episode of Semantic Reactions, featuring an interview with Renee Hobbs. If you like what you've heard, or even if you haven't, please consider becoming a member of the Institute of General Semantics, if you're not one already. In addition to supporting our efforts, IGS members receive an annual subscription to our journal, etc., a review of general semantics, access to our online and in-person events, lectures, and seminars, and discounts on the books and audiovisual materials that we sell. Regular membership is only $50 and half off for students. Your membership and any additional donations you care to make will help to support our offerings and activities as we work to bring a measure of sanity to the world. The Institute of General Semantics is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to research and education on a wide range of topics. They include language and symbols, meaning and perception, communication and representation, media and technology, science and epistemology, creativity, and critical thinking. We are dedicated to making the world a better place through practical strategies for improving our semantic environment, individually and collectively. For more information about the Institute and our activities, and to become a member and supporter of our work, please visit our website at generalsemantics.org. That's generalsemantics, one word, .org. And this brings to a close our 7th episode of Semantic Reactions, the official podcast of the Institute of General Semantics. This is Ben Houck, signing off, saying, we hope you enjoy us next time, and until then, just remember this simple fact, that the map is not the territory.